Julian Whitmore's bidding paddle rose just as the auctioneer prepared to sell me his house. The polished oak signaled with a dry knock, and every head in the ballroom turned toward the man seated 3 rows ahead of me. Gold light from the chandeliers silvered his dark hair at the temples. He wore charcoal wool, black gloves, and the same unreadable expression I remembered from dinners where his stepson had treated me like an embarrassing accessory. 2,400,000, the auctioneer called. Julian lowered the paddle without looking back. My fingers tightened around mine. The Whitmore estate had been empty for 11 months, its limestone facade stained by neglect, its rose garden stripped to thorns. I had spent years designing homes for strangers, yet this was the first property I wanted for reasons I could not put into a contract. 2,500,000, I said. A murmur traveled through the room. Julian finally turned. His gaze found me at once. Nothing in his face moved, but his gloved thumb pressed hard against the paddle's brass edge. He looked older than when I had last seen him, not diminished, merely sharpened. The wedding band that had once flashed whenever he quietly passed me a plate at the Whitmore table was gone. The auctioneer asked for another bid. Julian could have raised his paddle. Instead, he set it on the empty chair beside him. The gavel struck at $2,500,000, and the house became mine. Applause crackled around me like cellophane. By the time I reached the marble corridor, Julian was standing beneath a frosted window, fastening his coat. Cold air seeped through the old frame, carrying the scents of furniture wax and wet stone. "You stopped bidding," I said. "You noticed." His voice was lower than I remembered. I assumed Whitmore's preferred winning. "I'm no longer a Whitmore." He pulled a cream envelope from inside his coat and held it out. The divorce decree was visible through the unsealed flap. Finalized 6 weeks earlier. "Congratulations," I said, and hated how cruel the word sounded. Condolences would be equally misplaced. He tried to withdraw the envelope, but I took it before he could. Our gloves brushed. He went still. So did I. Years ago, when his stepson had abandoned me at a Whitmore charity dinner, Julian had found me waiting outside in 20-degree cold. He had given me his scarf, called a car, and never mentioned the humiliation again. It had been the smallest kindness in that family. It was also the only one I had never forgotten. "Why bid on the house if you don't want it?" I asked. Julian glanced toward the ballroom doors, where familiar voices were drawing closer. I wanted to keep them from turning it into another monument to themselves. "Then why let me have it?" His eyes returned to mine. "Because you once sketched a sunroom on a napkin and said every house should contain one place where nobody had to pretend." The remembered paper seemed to crackle between us. I had drawn it during my final dinner there while his stepson flirted openly across the table. I had not known Julian was listening. The ballroom doors opened, releasing laughter and the sharp scent of expensive cologne. Julian stepped away before the Whitmore relatives could reach us. "There is one room the listing photographs didn't show," he said. He placed an old iron key in my palm. Its teeth were cold enough to sting. "Come to the house tomorrow at 7. I'll open it for you." "Why not give me the key now?" "Because it isn't the lock you'll need help with." Then he walked down the stone staircase alone, leaving me with proof that his marriage was over, a key to a hidden room, and the disturbing realization that the one person I should have wanted erased from my past had remembered the exact shape of my impossible home. Rain tapped the boarded windows at 7, and the old Whitmore estate answered with the slow groan of settling timber. Inside, the air was 40 degrees colder than the ballroom had been, carrying wet plaster, dust, and the faint mineral smell of extinguished fireplaces. I found Julian beside the library shelves, one hand braced against the walnut paneling while the iron key trembled between his fingers. "The room is behind this wall," he said. His voice caught on the last word. A flush had spread above his collar, stark against his pale skin, and silver strands clung damply to his temples. When I moved closer, a warm fragrance surfaced beneath the dust, cedar sweetened by ripe pears, deepening with every uneven breath he took. My alpha instincts recognized it before reason did. "Omega." I stopped several feet away. "Julian, what suppressant are you taking?" The key slipped from his hand and struck the floorboards with a metallic crack. His gaze snapped to mine, all the reserve stripped from it. Then he turned to the shelves and pressed a carved rosette. The bookcase released with a click, revealing a narrow door that had been painted into the wall. He pushed through without waiting for me. I followed only as far as the threshold. Amber lamplight warmed a hidden dressing room lined with cedar cabinets. Prescription bottles stood inside one open drawer beside neutralizing patches and sealed scent blockers. Julian gripped the marble washstand, breathing through his mouth. The pharmacy changed manufacturers, he said. I thought the dosage was holding. It isn't. I'm aware. Another wave hit him. His shoulders locked, but instead of reaching for me, he pulled a folded blocker from the drawer and slapped it against his throat. The adhesive rasped over his skin. It did nothing to stop the scent filling the room. Go outside, he ordered. Call the number on the blue bottle and tell the physician I need an emergency prescription. I took out my phone but stayed behind the threshold. Does anyone else know? Julian twisted the cap from the bottle and tipped it over his palm. Empty. My doctor. My former husband. Now you. The rain rattled harder against the roof. You hid being an Omega through your entire marriage. I was permitted to remain a Whitmore only while I passed as a beta. Each word came clipped and deliberate. An acknowledged Omega could not control the family trust, host its donors, or represent its name. My husband called concealment a practical compromise. His fingers whitened around the empty bottle. It became 22 years of practical compromise. The hidden room changed before my eyes. It was not a secret retreat. It was where Julian had been forced to store every trace of himself before walking back into that house disguised as someone the family considered worthy. I reached the physician, confirmed the address, and arranged for medication to arrive within the hour. When I ended the call, Julian had lowered himself onto the cedar bench. He unlocked the front door remotely so the courier could enter, then slid his phone across the floor toward me rather than asking me to come closer. Even now, the decision remained his. You should know what an untreated heat can do to an alpha at this distance, he said. I know what consent means at any distance. His eyes closed briefly. The old pipes knocked inside the wall, and the lamp threw a thin gold line across his wedding ring mark. Then hear me clearly, Ethan. Do not touch me unless I ask. I won't. The answer settled between us, steadier than the storm. Julian looked at me again, no disguise left in his scent or face, and pushed the hidden door shut behind us. And if the medicine arrives too late, he said, I may have to ask. Blue light pulsed across the stone floor as the courier's car disappeared beyond the iron gates. The emergency package sat unopened beside my knee, its insulated lining cold and slick beneath my fingers. Inside, one injector had cracked during transit. The other should have contained a full dose, but its indicator glowed amber instead of green. Half strength, Julian said. His voice scraped against the steady knocking of the pipes. It may take the edge off. It won't stop this. I set the injector on the cedar bench without moving closer. Heat had flushed his throat above his loosened collar, and the room smelled of warm cedar and ripe pear, threaded with the medicinal bite of alcohol wipes. Your doctor can send another. The roads are flooding. 3 hours, perhaps 4. Julian looked toward the black windows, where rainwater trembled against the glass. Then he stood. His hand shook once before closing around the edge of the bench. Ethan, look at me. I did. I am asking you to help me through this heat. The words were deliberate, each one placed between us like a signed line on a contract. Not because of instinct. Not because you were once involved with my stepson. Because I am choosing you. My pulse struck hard, but I stayed where I was. You can change your mind at any moment. If you say stop, I stop. If you want distance, I give it. Julian crossed the room himself. The floorboards groaned beneath his steps. Firelight caught the silver at his temples. He took my hand and placed it against his wrist, where his pulse raced beneath cool skin. Then stop making me cross this room alone. I used the damaged dose first. I brought him water, lowered the lights, and opened the narrow window until rain-cooled air moved through the hidden room. Every touch began with a question. Every answer came clearly. When Julian drew me down beside him, it was not surrender but direction. The storm swallowed the hours beyond the walls, leaving only muted thunder, cedar blankets, and his fingers tightening around mine whenever another wave passed. What happened between us remained gentle and chosen, intimacy measured not by urgency, but by the permission he gave and the care I returned. Near dawn, the rain softened to a silver hiss. Julian slept with his head against my shoulder, his wedding ring mark pale in the first gray light. For once, No locked door stood between who he was and what he wanted. I woke later to cold sheets. His folded blanket rested at the foot of the bench. The medical packaging had been collected, the hidden cabinet locked, and the old key lay on top of my coat. I found Julian in the marble foyer fastening his cuffs. His face had returned to its careful stillness, but he missed the button twice. "You don't have to leave," I said. "That is exactly why I do." His gaze moved over me, then toward the portrait-lined staircase. "Your former partner used affection as a weapon whenever he felt humiliated. I cannot wake tomorrow wondering whether last night was your way of striking back through me." "It wasn't." "I believe you believe that." The front door opened, admitting wet wind and the smell of soaked earth. Julian stepped outside before I could answer. A car waited beyond the columns. He paused only long enough to speak without turning. "Do not follow me until you know whether you chose me, or merely the one Whitmore he could never forgive you for touching." Then the door closed, and the key remained in my hand, no longer an invitation but a boundary I would have to earn the right to cross. Rain traced silver lines down the windows of my studio, blurring the cranes above downtown into long black strokes. 3 weeks had passed since Julian left the key in my hand, and I had obeyed his warning. No calls, no visits, no attempt to turn an unanswered question into pressure. At 10:17 on Monday morning, the elevator chimed beyond the glass wall. Julian stepped onto the polished concrete carrying a cream medical envelope. His dark hair, silvering at the temples, was damp from the rain, and his charcoal coat hung open despite the cold. He crossed the drafting floor without hesitation. Conversations thinned around him. Keyboards clicked beneath the low hum of ventilation. "Your office," he said. Inside, Julian closed the door himself and lowered the blinds. Water tapped steadily against the glass. The room smelled of wet wool, black coffee, and the cedar soap I had tried not to remember. He remained standing while I moved behind my desk, placing its oak width between us because distance had been the last thing he asked of me. "I know why I chose you," I said. "That isn't why I came." Julian set the envelope beside my scale models and removed 2 white plastic tests. Each showed 2 unmistakable pink lines. The hard edge of my desk pressed into my palm. "Both. Taken 48 hours apart." His fingers tightened once around the envelope. "My physician confirmed the pregnancy this morning." The traffic below became a muted rush beneath the rain. I pulled out a chair, but did not approach him. "Are you all right?" "Physically, yes." Julian sat without taking his eyes from mine. Paper rasped as he opened the envelope and slid an ultrasound print across the oak. 2 small shapes floated in grainy darkness, each marked by a precise, white circle. "There are 2. The words struck more deeply than surprise could reach. 2 heart rates were printed along the bottom margin in narrow black type. I touched only the corner of the image. "Twins. 7 weeks, according to the scan." His voice stayed level, but one cuff had been folded inward, pinched and refolded until the fabric creased. I looked at the photograph again, then at him. "What do you want?" Julian's shoulders shifted, as though he had prepared for every question except that one. "I am keeping them." The rain sharpened against the window. "I did not come for permission, Ethan. I will not hide them, and I will not let anyone call them a mistake to make this easier. If you want no part in their lives, say so now. I will arrange everything myself." "Is that what you think I want?" "I no longer build decisions around what I think an alpha might want." Julian rose and reclaimed the tests, but left the ultrasound between us. My former marriage took that habit from me at considerable cost. I stepped away from the desk, stopping several feet short of him. "I won't ask you to surrender another choice. But I need to say this clearly. I chose you that night. Not your name. Not your stepson's humiliation. You." His breath caught softly enough that the ventilation nearly swallowed it. "That answers the question I left you with," he said. "It does not answer mine." "Then ask it." Julian opened the blinds. Cold daylight flooded the office, exposing us to the silhouettes moving beyond the glass. "Will you stand beside me when this stops being private?" I turned the ultrasound so the 2 white circles faced me, then placed the old Whitmore key beside it. "Tell me when the next appointment is." Julian's gaze dropped to the key before returning to my face. "Thursday, 8 in the morning. I'll be there." His expression did not soften, but he left the ultrasound on my desk. At the door, his hand closed around the metal handle. Then understand what you just agreed to, he said. By Thursday, my former family will know who fathered my children. The ultrasound monitor hummed beneath the clinic's white fluorescent lights, while sleep tapped against the narrow window like fingernails on glass. 2 rapid heartbeats filled the examination room, distinct and impossibly steady. I sat beside Julian rather than across from him, my coat still cold from outside, and watched his fingers tighten around the paper covering the table. Both are developing normally, the physician said, but stress is no longer an abstract concern. Julian glanced at me when I took out my phone. What are you doing? Making sure Thursday changes more than our calendars. Before he could answer, I photographed the ultrasound image beside our joined hands and sent it to my firm's communications director with one sentence. I am the father, and I will be fully involved. The response arrived before we reached the parking garage. My phone vibrated against my palm until the concrete seemed to echo with it. Missed calls from Whitmore numbers, reporters, and the board overseeing the Hawthorne Civic Center, the largest contract my studio had ever secured. Julian stopped beside my truck, his breath turning white in the frigid air. You could have issued a private statement. Privacy was the cage they built around you. And your firm employs 32 people. The words landed harder than any accusation. I called my managing partner beneath the yellow garage lights and confirmed the statement myself. 20 minutes later, the Hawthorne board suspended our contract pending an ethics review. No allegation had been named. None was necessary. The silence after the call smelled of exhaust and wet concrete. Julian held out his hand for my keys. Take me to a hotel? I won't let your employees pay for my presence. I placed the keys in his palm, then closed his fingers around them. You're not going to a hotel. By noon, I was driving him through the iron gates of the Whitmore estate. Contractors had stripped decades of dark wallpaper from the entrance hall, leaving plaster walls raw beneath work lamps. Sawdust warmed the air with the scent of pine, and somewhere upstairs a nail gun cracked in measured bursts. Julian remained on the threshold. You bought this house to erase them. No, I bought it because I knew what it could become. I led him toward the east wing, where sunlight poured through newly uncovered windows and pooled across unfinished oak. The room waiting there had a private bath, a fireplace, and no lock on the outside of its door. Stay here while I finish the renovation. Close to the clinic. No reporters in the lobby. No Whitmores deciding when you're allowed to breathe. His fingertips passed over the smooth new doorframe. And what do you call this arrangement? Temporary, until you choose otherwise. Tires ground across the gravel before he could respond. 3 black sedans stopped beyond the front steps, and my phone lit with a final message from my former partner. If he moves into that house, you are declaring war on this family. Julian looked through the dusty glass at the figures emerging into the slate. I opened the front door before they could knock, the cold rushing over the bare floors behind me. Julian lives here now, I said, loud enough for every Whitmore on the steps to hear. The children are mine, and no one will use either of them to bargain with me. Behind me, Julian set his suitcase on the floor instead of reaching for it. Then the estate's attorney raised a sealed folder and gave him until morning to choose between remaining under my roof and retaining everything still held in his name. The sealed folder slid across the scarred oak table, its paper edge whispering over dust while sleet tapped against the tall windows. By morning, the attorney had said, yet sunrise had barely turned the unfinished walls gray when another car rolled over the gravel. Julian stood beside the cold fireplace in a charcoal sweater, one hand resting below his ribs. I moved toward the foyer, but his fingers closed around my wrist. This one is mine. My former partner entered without removing his wet coat. Meltwater darkened the shoulders, and the sharp scent of expensive cologne spread through the room. His gaze dropped to Julian's hand, then to the sealed folder between us. Leave the city, he said. Sign away your remaining claim to the Whitmore trusts, and I'll stop the press campaign. The Hawthorne board will reinstate Ethan's contract. No one at his firm has to lose a job because of this. I stepped forward. Julian moved first, placing himself between us. And my children? Raised somewhere quiet, my ex replied. Away from our name. Away from him. The refrigerator motor kicked on in the temporary kitchen, filling the silence with a low mechanical hum. Julian opened the folder. Asset schedules, trust provisions, deeds, and account numbers covered the pages. Everything left from decades inside the Whitmore family had been reduced to neat columns of black ink. "You arranged this before the attorney came," Julian said. "I arranged an exit." "No. You priced my obedience." My former partner's mouth tightened. "You hid what you were for years. Don't pretend principle matters now." Julian's thumb pressed into the paper until it creased. "Your father required blockers before every board meeting. He chose my physicians. He told me an openly Omega spouse could never hold authority over Whitmore assets or sit beside him in public without weakening the family." His voice carried cleanly through the stripped room. "I agreed because I believed keeping the household intact would protect everyone in it, including you." A phone appeared in my ex's hand. "Be careful." Julian took out his own. The screen cast pale blue light over his face as he opened a prepared statement and attached prescription records, physician correspondence, and the marriage agreement that had governed his concealment. I had never seen the documents, but I recognized the decision in the stillness of his shoulders. "Once you send that, the trust will freeze everything," I said quietly. "I know. The accounts, the apartment, your retirement holdings. I know, Ethan." He looked at me then. "If I leave because they threaten what I own, our children inherit the same cage I did." My former partner reached for the phone. Julian stepped back and pressed send. The soft chime was almost lost beneath the sleet. Within seconds, notifications began striking the screen. One, then another, then a rapid metallic cascade. The estate attorney called. Julian answered on speaker. "Mr. Whitmore, publication constitutes a breach of your marital confidentiality provisions. Your remaining distributions are suspended effective immediately. Then record that I relinquish every contested claim." Julian said, "I will not leave Ethan, and I will not erase these children to preserve your client's reputation." The line went silent before disconnecting. My former partner stared at him as if the man before him were a stranger. Julian removed the old Whitmore signet ring from his finger and set it on top of the unsigned ultimatum. Gold struck wood with a small, final click. Then he crossed to the dusty window, where weak morning light touched his profile and the hand protecting the twins. "You wanted an exit," he said without turning. "Now the family has one, from my life." Tires tore through wet gravel minutes later. I found Julian in the temporary kitchen, counting the cash in his wallet beside an untouched mug of tea. His entire fortune now fit between both hands. When I offered him my checkbook, he closed it and pushed it back. "I chose to stay," he said. "Let me learn what that choice costs." Before I could answer, his phone lit with the first public response to his statement. Not from the Whitmores, but from someone claiming Julian had lied for years about what he had done to my former partner and me. Julian read the name, and all warmth left his fingertips against mine. "Ethan," he whispered, "there is something about your breakup that you were never told." Rain tapped the unfinished copper roof with the patience of fingernails against glass, while cold air carried the sharp scent of plaster through the temporary kitchen. Julian turned his glowing phone face down beside the untouched tea. I pulled out the chair opposite him, but he remained standing, one palm braced against the counter and the other spread protectively over the twins. "Tell me what happened," I said. Not what the Whitmores wanted me to believe. The refrigerator hummed between us. Julian crossed to a stack of boxes and removed a narrow cedar case, its brass clasp dulled by years of handling. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and a flash drive labeled with the date my relationship had ended. "Your former partner planned to use your preliminary drawings in a Whitmore development," Julian said. "Without your name. Without paying you." The paper felt rough beneath my thumb. An email displayed my former partner's instructions to invite me to the family anniversary dinner, provoke me into arguing, and record enough of it to portray me as unstable if I challenged the theft. Another message joked that an architect desperate for approval would sign anything after being humiliated in front of the right people. Heat climbed beneath my collar despite the draft. I remembered Julian intercepting me outside that dinner, telling me the evening had been canceled, then refusing to explain. By sunrise, my relationship had ended, and the Whitmores had blamed Julian for interfering. "You stopped me from walking into it," I said. Julian's reflection trembled in the dark window. "I threatened to expose him unless he returned every drawing and destroyed the recording plan. He chose the breakup instead. Then he told you I despised you and had forced his hand." A faint herbal scent escaped Julian's cold tea as I lifted another page. His signature appeared beneath a private settlement requiring the stolen designs to be surrendered. In return, he had accepted legal silence. Why let me hate you? My voice scraped against the bare walls. Julian finally faced me. Gray morning light caught the fine exhaustion beneath his eyes. Because proving what he did would have destroyed his career, his relationship with his mother, and what remained of that family. I thought stopping him was enough. I thought silence could preserve something. It preserved his lie. Yes. The word landed softly, with nowhere to hide. I carried the case into the adjoining workroom, where blueprints rustled beneath the leaking rhythm overhead. At my drafting table, I scanned the settlement and sent copies to my attorney, then opened the public accusation on Julian's phone. My response contained no insult and no Whitmore history. Only the dated agreement proving Julian had protected my work before I knew it was threatened. I pressed publish. The accusation disappeared within minutes, but the truth remained, severing the last loyalty I had mistaken for love. When I returned, Julian had lowered himself into the chair, his knuckles pale around the mug. I set the old brass key, the one he had left at dawn, beside his hand. You once guarded my future by deciding what truth I could survive, I said. Don't do that again. His fingers closed around the key, warming its tarnished edge. Then ask me anything. I crouched beside him as rainwater whispered through the gutters. No more inherited silence. No more saving families that demand you disappear. Julian fitted the key onto his ring, but before he could answer, his phone vibrated with a message from his physician requesting an immediate consultation about his latest test results. The color drained from his lips. This time, he passed the phone directly to me. We face it together, he said. The fluorescent lights in the examination room hummed above the sharp scent of antiseptic, while cold air slipped through the opening of Julian's paper gown. The physician moved the ultrasound probe twice, then turned the monitor away. I need you at the hospital now. One placenta isn't delivering enough blood to the smaller twin. Julian's hand found mine before the sentence ended. Hours later, monitors pulsed green in a dim hospital room. Their steady beeping interrupted whenever Julian shifted against the stiff sheets. His physician explained that medication and continuous observation might stabilize the pregnancy, but delivery could become necessary with little warning. Julian looked toward the dark window, one palm spread over the curve carrying our sons. If they come tonight, the neonatal team will be ready, the physician said. My phone vibrated on the metal tray. My managing partner's name filled the screen. I stepped into the corridor, where polished floors reflected strips of blue evening light. The Hawthorne board will reinstate us tomorrow, my partner said. But they want you at the emergency hearing in person. No statements about Julian, no appearance at this hospital, and no claim of paternity until the contract is signed. Through the glass panel, I watched Julian adjust a loosened sensor himself, his fingers unsteady against the adhesive. They're asking me to erase my family for a building. I'm asking you to save every employee who depends on that building. The elevator chimed behind me. I could leave, repair the firm's future, and return before morning if nothing changed. But the physician hurried into Julian's room, and the monitor's rhythm sharpened. Give Hawthorne my resignation as principal architect, I said. Transfer my active projects to the partnership. If the board wants a firm without me, let them have one. Silence pressed against the line. You won't be able to undo this. I know. I ended the call and returned as the nurse raised Julian's bed. His skin had gone gray beneath the amber reading lamp, yet his gaze fixed on me. You should have gone. I pulled the visitor's chair against the bed until its legs scraped the tile. I spent years designing places that looked permanent. I'm staying for the people who make one worth coming home to. By morning, Julian's condition had steadied, but the blinds remained closed against hard white sunlight. A hospital social worker entered carrying a folder. Julian asked the physician and nurse to remain, then placed a pen against the first page. This grants Ethan immediate joint legal authority concerning the twins if I become unable to make decisions. My throat tightened. You don't have to give me that because I'm their alpha. I'm not. The brass key hung from Julian's finger beside the hospital band, tapping softly against the clipboard. Blood made you their father. Everything after that has been your choice. He signed, then turned the document toward me. I'm choosing you because when staying finally cost more than leaving, You stayed. I signed beneath his name. The social worker notarized both signatures, making our decision enforceable before the Whitmores, Hawthorne, or anyone else could reduce it to scandal. Julian covered my hand with his, warmth returning slowly to his fingertips. Then the fetal monitor changed cadence. The physician leaned toward the screen as both heartbeats accelerated, and the smaller twins' line began to dip. We've reached the point where waiting may cost them more than delivery, she said, reaching for the call button. You need to decide together how far we go to keep this pregnancy going. Julian tightened his grip around mine. This time, neither of us looked away. A soft alarm pulsed from the monitor, steady and low beneath the rush of rubber soles in the corridor. Cold blue light washed across Julian's face as the physician lowered the call button and explained that delivery now offered both babies the safest chance. Julian listened without looking at me. Then his fingers released mine, reached for the consent form, and signed first. Bring them home, he said, pushing the clipboard toward me. Both of you. I added my signature. The physician moved at once, and the room filled with clipped instructions, rolling wheels, and the sterile bite of antiseptic. I stayed beside Julian as they wheeled him beneath ceiling panels that flashed overhead like white frames of film. At the operating room doors, he caught my sleeve. If they ask you who you are, their father, I said. And yours, if you'll still have me when this is over. His mouth trembled into the smallest smile. Stay. The doors closed between us, but not for long. Less than an hour later, one thin cry pierced the chilled room, followed by another, quieter, rougher, but stubbornly alive. A nurse placed the larger twin against Julian's chest, while the smaller baby remained beneath the amber glow of a warming bed. Julian turned his head toward that distant bundle, unable to reach him. So I crossed the room and laid one finger inside the tiny hand. It closed around me with astonishing force. Your Omega is waiting, I whispered. Let's not keep him waiting anymore. 3 weeks later, morning sunlight spilled through the restored windows of the Whitmore estate, warming the oak floors Julian had once crossed as though every room belonged to someone else. No family portraits remained above the staircase. In their place hung 2 framed hospital bracelets and the first photograph of all 4 of us, exhausted and unsmiling and real. Julian stood in the nursery wearing my old gray sweater, one twin against his shoulder, while the smaller slept in the crook of my arm. Fresh plaster still scented the hallway, mixing with coffee and warm formula. The brass key I had returned to him rested in his palm. I spent half my life being told which doors I could enter, he said, and who I was permitted to love. He walked to the front door and fitted the key into the new lock himself. Then he removed it and pressed it into my hand. I don't want this house in my name alone. I closed his fingers around the key again. Then we keep it together. Months later, I opened a smaller architecture studio in the sunroom, designing homes instead of monuments to powerful families. Julian kept no Whitmore fortune, but he filled the estate with midnight feedings, crooked lullabies, and the soft thud of bare feet between bassinets. On the twins' first birthday, he found me beneath the porch lights, carrying one sleepy boy while the other clung to his shirt. You once asked if I'd still have you, he said. I'm ready to answer. He placed his free hand over mine. Inside, 2 candles flickered above a lopsided cake, and rain whispered against the windows we had restored together. Yes, Julian had once been forbidden to love, but in the home we chose, love no longer required permission.